I will first introduce Professor Ashok Sen, his contributions. Professor Ashok Sen, he was born in Calcutta, and after completing his schooling from Shailendra Sirkar Vidyalaya in Calcutta, he earned his Bachelor of Science degree in 1975 from the Presidency College, well-known Presidency College under the University of Calcutta, and Master's degree later from IIT Kanpur. He did his doctoral work in physics at Stony Brook University. Regarding his career, he has made a number of major original contributions to the subject of string theory, including the landmark paper on strong-weak coupling duality or S-duality. This paper was influential in changing the course of research in this field. He pioneered the study of unstable D branches and made the famous Sen conjecture about open string tachyon condensation on such branches. His description of rolling tachyons has made influential in string cosmology. He has also co-authored many important papers on string field theory. One of his most recent contributions include the entropy function formalism for extremal black holes and its applications to attractors. His current research interests are around the attractor mechanism and the precision counting of microstates for black holes in string theory. Of his nearly 200 research papers, as many as 47 papers have over 100 citations each. Regarding honors and awards, he has won ICTP prize in 1989, SS Bhatnagar Award in 1994, Padma Shri 2001, Fellow of Royal Society 1998, then Infosys Prize in Mathematical Science 209, Urey Miller Fundamental Physics Prize 2012 for his work on string theory. So that was in this 2012 year, everyone knows that this prestigious award was given to him. So now I would like to invite him for his plenary talk on search for unified theory. Professor Sen,
So the question that we would like to study is something that has been around almost since the beginning of civilization, and that's the question as to what are the basic constituents of matter and what are their properties. And what I try to do in this talk is to summarize our current understanding of the subject and also our attempts to go beyond what we know in present experiment. And I should also say that even though I'll present this as a story, each line of the story is based on our mathematical foundation, okay, and in fact that is the reason why this is part of mathematical sciences, right? Without, in fact, I mean, if one tries to address this question as to why is it that we know much more now than people who first asked this question, there are two main reasons. The first one being that we have a lot of technological tools, experimental science has improved tremendously, okay? But the second one, and which is perhaps more important, is that our understanding of mathematics has improved tremendously. Okay, and so we really have the mathematical tools that we need to describe this subject. So drawing a very schematic diagram of our modern understanding of the ultimate constituents of matter. So in a sense, the biggest constituents, okay, or the crudest constituents of matter are called molecules. Probably have all heard of molecules. But we know that molecules themselves are not really truly elementary particles. They are not the smallest constituents. Each molecule is made typically of a set of atoms. Yes, electrons still, as according to our knowledge, remains an elementary particle. And finally, as of today, we know that while these do appear to be elementary, okay, these are not the only elementary particles we have in nature. There is in fact a whole zoo of elementary particles, of which these are only a few. And later on, I will have the opportunity to describe this zoo of elementary particles. Now, in order to study properties of matter, it's not enough to know what are the elementary particles. We also need to know how they interact. Okay, and they typically interact by various kinds of forces. And the four major forces that we know in nature are gravitational and electromagnetic. These have been known for a long time. But starting from 1900s, we came to know that there are also two other forces that operate at the subnuclear level, namely the strong and the weak force. The strong force, for example, is responsible for binding the protons and neutrons inside a nucleus, or the quarks inside a proton and neutron. The weak force is responsible for various kinds of radioactive decays of unstable nuclei. So these forces give rise to complicated interactions between elementary particles, and these interactions are typically experimentally measured by simply studying how the elementary particles scatter off each other. So you probably have heard of the Large Hadron Collider, which is operating in Geneva, in Zurich, which was recently in the news for the discovery of the Higgs particle. That does essentially the same thing. It collides elementary particles like protons, and it accelerates. First of all, it accelerates elementary particles like protons to very high energy, and then it makes them collide. It makes two protons collide. As a result, what happens is the quarks which are inside the proton collide. Okay, they scatter, and by knowing how they scatter, we can get indirect knowledge about what kind of forces operate between the quarks. Okay, that's the way we study the physics of elementary particles in experiments. Now, it turns out that even though I listed four major forces that operate between elementary particles, the effect of gravitational force between elementary particles is negligible compared to the other forces. And one doesn't need too much of a complicated mathematics to see this. To see this, one can only compare the electrostatic force between two protons with the gravitational force between two protons at rest. Okay, by using standard elementary formula that we learned in the high school. So here is the formula. So we know that the gravitational force between two protons at rest will be given by the Newton's law of gravity, which includes a factor of Newton's constant, Newton's gravitational constant, G. Then, because we are considering two protons, you have the square of the mass of the proton. This is the product of the masses of the two particles which are there. And r is the distance between the two protons, because you have to divide by r square because of the inverse square law of gravity. And similarly, the electrostatic force between two protons is given by a similar formula, okay, Coulomb's law of electrostatics. You take the square of the electric charge of each proton divided by the square of the distance between the two protons. And of course, you can replace a proton by any other particle. Okay, for example, you can replace the proton by an electron, in which case this will be replaced by the mass of the electron. Now, you see that the r square of course cancels in this ratio. So this ratio is in fact a ratio of fundamental constants, right? It involves the Newton's gravitational constant, whose value is given here. Okay, I am giving all the values in CGS units. Mp is the proton mass, whose value is given here, and Ep is the proton charge, whose value is given here. And when you plug these values here, you find that this ratio is in fact an extremely tiny number, 10 to the minus 46, showing that indeed the gravitational force is extremely small compared to the electrostatic force. And you can do similar analysis for studying the relative strength of the gravitational force and the strong or weak nuclear force. Then every time gravity turns out to be the loser. okay, given the fact that we can collide elementary particles, we can study their scattering and try to indirectly infer what kind of forces operate between the elementary particles. Our primary goal as a theoretician will be to try to formulate a mathematical theory of elementary particles and their forces. But while attempting to formulate a mathematical theory of the elementary particles and their forces, we must remember two important points. The first point is that in typical experiment that one performs involving elementary particles, the elementary particles move very fast. For example, the protons that are used in the Large Hadron Collider, their velocity is very close to the velocity of light. And because of this, we cannot use standard Newtonian mechanics that we learned in high school. We have to use what is called the special theory of relativity, okay, which was developed by Einstein in the early 1900s. The second point we have to keep in mind is that the elementary particles are very small. Okay, this is much smaller than the kind of matter that you are familiar with, the kind of weights that you deal with. Okay, and you can see it easily by looking at the mass of the proton. Right, it's 1.6 times 10 to the minus 24 grams. Right, much smaller than anything that we normally experience in nature. And because of this smallness, we have to describe them using quantum mechanics. Okay, so we need both special theory of relativity and quantum mechanics, and both subjects of course are by now very well understood because of the work in the early 1900s, okay, to about 1950. The whole subject of special relativity and quantum mechanics was completely developed. Now it turns out that there is a completely consistent mathematical theory. Okay, and it's so consistent mathematically as well as so successful experimentally that it has come to be known as the standard model of elementary particles. And this describes all the elementary particles and their forces, provided we are willing to leave out the force of gravity. So this theory describes elementary particles very well if we pretend that the elementary particles do not have any gravitational force operating. And this theory, as I already said, is based on the principles of quantum mechanics and special theory of relativity. And in principle, this theory can be used to calculate the result of any experiment that we wish to perform involving elementary particles. And in each such calculation, of course, we will make a small error because we leave out the force of gravity. But as I have already said, that the gravitational force is extremely tiny compared to other forces, so we don't make that much error. Okay, in fact, the error which are called 1, 2, and 3. So this is one whole class of elementary particles. U and D are the quarks which make up protons and neutrons. Okay, the other quarks you don't see directly inside protons and neutrons, but if you make two elementary particles collide at a very high energy, you produce these other quarks. Then there is a second class of particles which are called leptons. You recognize this E refers to the familiar electron, okay, that I mentioned earlier. But you see that there are also many other kinds of leptons which are not familiar because we don't see them, we don't encounter them in everyday life. So this particle is called neutrino, and then like the electron and the electron neutrino, there is a muon which has properties similar to that of an electron and the muon neutrino, and then there is another particle tau which again has properties similar to that of an electron and then tau. And I should also say that each of these particles, quarks and leptons, also have the antiparticles, okay, which are not listed separately, just the same space. Okay, so we can double the list, okay, and write the antiquarks and anti-leptons. Then there are some other particles which are called mediators. These are called mediators because these are the ones which are responsible for the strong, weak and electromagnetic force that is the force between elementary particles. The photon is responsible for the electromagnetic force between the elementary particles. And then there are three particles, W plus and W minus and Z. These are responsible for the weak force between the elementary particles. Now in this case, it turns out that we don't have to add antiparticles because gluons have their own antiparticles. So is the photon. W plus and W minus, these are antiparticles of each other. And Z again is its own antiparticle. And finally, the last in the list is the Higgs particle. This you might have heard of recently because this is the particle that was claimed to have been discovered in the Large Hadron Collider a few months ago. Now I should say that here I have presented the final story of Standard Model, but of course it took many years to develop the Standard Model. But by the middle of 1970s, the Standard Model was more or less completely developed with all the particles predicted. And in fact, while some of the particles were known at the time of formulating the theory, there are several particles which are not known. Okay, they are in fact predicted by the Standard Model and later taught. Example of such particles are W plus W minus and Z. Okay, these particles are predicted much before they are discovered. Okay, they are discovered again in CERN, okay, in another accelerator, okay, which are much lower energy. Similarly, top one was predicted before it is discovered. This was discovered finally in a place near Chicago, okay, called Fermilab. And the Higgs probably have all heard in the news. Okay, this was again predicted many years ago, okay, during the formulation of the Standard Model. By mid-70s, it was known that the Higgs particle must exist, and this was discovered only very recently. So here you see the power of mathematical consistency of the theory. That even though there was no trace of these particles when in experiments, the mathematical consistency of the theory demanded that these particles must exist, and people went and looked for them, and after many years they eventually found these particles. Now, since Professor Tripathi mentioned the Young-Mills problem, the millennium problem, so given the success of the Standard Model, one could ask that does this mean that we have finally found a complete theory that describes the basic constituents of matter and their properties? Now, unfortunately, the answer to this question is no. There are various reasons. First of all, as I will discuss a few minutes later, that there are some experimental results which are in contradiction of the Standard Model. Okay, they don't quite fit in with the Standard Model, with the prediction of the Standard Model. For example, Standard Model predicts that the particles called neutrinos, okay, see this list, neutrino, electron neutrino, muon neutrino and tau neutrino. According to the Standard Model theory, these particles must have zero mass. Okay, they should have no mass. However, and this is what people believed for a long time, till about year 2000, okay, people took this as accepted fact, okay, and indeed the mass of the neutrinos is very, very small. But nevertheless, it was found in experiments, okay, that the neutrinos have very, very small mass. Okay, it's not massless. And hence, this contradicts the theory of which the Standard Model is based. However, this is not a very serious problem, because it turns out that it is possible to modify the Standard Model by some minor changes and incorporate the mass of the neutrino. Okay, it doesn't require changing any of the basic principles which are, as far as experiments are concerned, Standard Model predictions